Our next speaker takes us from, the framework level thinking into a very practical example. Jodi Cooley, Executive Director of SNOLAB, will share how her team approached asset management, starting with a really simple question: what do we actually have? And she will walk us through the challenges, lessons learned, and practical tools that SNOLAB developed, many of which are directly transferable to other facilities, regardless of their size and complexity. Thank you. Jodi.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Also, I want to thank CFI for inviting our facility to come up and talk about what we did. I think that part of the reason that they picked us, all 6 of the MRFs had to do this project, and I think they picked us because I think we have an interesting story that might be relatable or more relatable to some of the smaller facilities. And so before I get started, I want to acknowledge that SNOLAB sits on the traditional territory of the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, land that has been cared for by the Atingmashing and Anishinaabe First Nations people who lived in harmony with the land and waters long before our experiments and facilities existed. At SNOLAB, our land acknowledgement is important to us because it reminds us to consider how our work in science and research can respect and support the communities around us. So I think it's important to give a little bit of a timeline and history of how SNOLAB even came into existence, because this is important for shaping exactly where we were when CFI asked us to do this asset management plan under 3 different scenarios for 15 years and how it caught us. So SNOLAB was originally a single experiment site. It was originally built because a scientific collaboration called SNOW was interested in trying to study something called the solar neutrino problem. And basically what this problem is that there are 3 flavors of neutrinos: electron, muon, and tau. And these neutrinos are coming from us from all over the cosmos. And one of the sources of these neutrinos is the sun. And detectors for many decades had been observing a deficit in the number of electron neutrinos that you would expect from the sun. And nobody could solve it. It was called the solar neutrino problem. I actually have a book sitting on my shelf saying like the 10 biggest problems in, astroparticle physics from the 1990s, written by John Bacall, a father of neutrino astrophysics. And the solar neutrino problem was like number 1 in the book. So in the 1980s, this collaboration formed to build an experiment in Canada to study this problem. The experiment itself, so I have a timeline here, and what you can see from the black circles, it's construction on the cavern to host the experiment, and the experiment itself all started in 1990 and wasn't finished till 1998. So it took 8 years to build. And then after the experiment was built, it ran from 1999 to 2006. Its biggest scientific accomplishment is that it proved that neutrinos have mass. And the reason we were seeing fewer electron neutrinos than we expected is because as the neutrinos traveled from the sun to the earth, they would change from one flavor into another. And it solved this long-standing solar neutrino problem. It was such a great accomplishment and so important to science that in 2015, Art McDonald, the SNOW director, was co-awarded the Nobel Prize for this discovery. And I will mention, I worked on the other experiment that was in Japan that also was awarded for this discovery. So I feel like I've kind of been connected to SNOLAB for a long time. So what happened is, due to the success of the SNOW experiment, funding was approved in 2002 to expand the facility from a single user site into a general purpose laboratory for deep underground science. And so just to give you an idea of this, Whoa. Okay. So that is not the laser. Sorry. Wait, how I've really messed this up. I need help. Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. All right. So I'm not going to point so much. I think. Okay. So I don't have a laser I can point to, but in the picture of the schematic of the lab, if you go to the left-hand side, lower left-hand corner, there's a cavern called the Snow Experiment. That's the original site. The rest of this, it represents the expansion. So construction on that expansion was completed in 2009, and the facility then started operating as a clean space in March 2011. So you can see also from the dimensions here, like we really increased our space. So the expanded SNOLAB facility was completed, adding another 3,700 square meters of clean space, and officially opened as a multi-science program facility in 2012. So essentially, the amount of clean space we have now, when you add the original snow caverns and all the caverns we have together, is around 5,000 square meters. And we have another 3,000 square meters of dirty space that houses all of sort of our utilities and facilities. So air handlers, sewage treatment plant, things like that. So I want to make a note here because I think it's important to understand this as you understand our story. So in 2009, we had approximately a dozen employees for the facility. Today, we have 153. So we had a real expansion, like a quick expansion. So thinking about our asset management plan in sort of that first decade, the facility itself, I have a few pictures here, kind of before and after of a couple of the spaces. So in the bottom left, you're looking at when the facility sort of opened, the cube hall, one of our larger halls. And then the next picture over, you're looking at that same sort of hall today. You're looking at the deck. It's completely filled. And if you could see underneath it, you would see there are 3 experiments, 2 that are operating and 1 that is under construction in that space. The picture in the middle is an empty cavern. It's the ladder labs. And again, if you were to look at the picture and you kind of go into the middle, there's kind of 2 caverns with some rooks that look like a ladder. So you're kind of looking down the hall of one of that. I visited this lab in 2012. It was empty. It was beautiful. It was clean, absolutely empty. You go today, and I have a couple of pictures trying to capture just how filled this lab is. We have now only 1 space in the laboratory that's not filled, and we're working really hard with CFI and international partners to procure a major international experiment to go in that space. So the other thing you need to know is that at SNOLAB, we're really different than a lot of the other facilities. Our experiments are really large and complex. They can take a decade to build. Some of the largest experiments, they take a long time to build. Some of the smaller experiments can be done quickly. And so it took a decade to fill the lab. Again, like I point to this rapid growth we had. And so that first decade, as we were operating, we're filling the lab. So our asset management strategy was if it breaks, fix it or replace it. And if you have to replace it, buy 2. So we realize that we're now at a point where that's probably not the best strategy you should have for a lab our size operating in the way we were. So we had already had it in our mind that in, calendar year 25, so this last year, that we should start an asset management, like we should start an inventory and start thinking about how to manage our assets a little bit better. And so we had put together this goal that we were going to work on the underground facility. So we have facilities underground, but we also have facilities on the surface to support the work. And then CFI asked us to do this 15-year plan, an asset management plan under 3 different scenarios. And the scenarios were maintain current levels of operation, so fully support the needs of the Canadian research community, increase global competitiveness, and to have this asset management plan. So our modest idea of taking a step into this asset management plan sort of area suddenly grew into something that was a huge project. And CFI gave us very clear instructions of what it was they wanted. So they wanted, and this actually comes exactly from the email I got from you, Claudia. They wanted an inventory of major capital assets, including the scientific equipment, The non-scientific equipment, so fixed overhead cranes, lifting equipment, HVAC, standard power control, communication systems, etc., and buildings if applicable. And each of these assets were required to have, they basically provide us a table, an asset category and description, the age and year of asset, estimated remaining useful life, the asset condition, description of repair or replacement requirements, the cost of repair and replacement, considering inflation, estimated year of repair or replacement, a risk-based priority ranking, and a rationale for the ranking. So this seemed to us an incredibly enormous plan. I have to admit that when I got this email, I closed it. I put it away for 3 days, and I was like, this can't be real. 3 days later, I opened it up and started thinking about it, working with CFI, working with our university partners to try to think about how we were going to do this ambitious plan. And the first thing we realized was that SNOLAB both had limited capacity to actually put together this ambitious of a plan. And we also didn't have the expertise in-house to be able to do it. So internal, we had limited capacity for life cycle modeling of assets. So this is like the service life, the repair and replacement timing, and the cost and forecasting. There's actually people out there who are like engineers who this is what they do. And we just don't have that in-house. So what we saw early on is that we needed to hire an external consultant. Our company was called Roth, and we engaged them to help provide that element, that expertise. Roth, like I said, they use the specialized software to estimate the asset lifespan, repair and replacement timing, and life cycle costs. Okay, but just because you hire an external company to do this for you doesn't mean that the work gets pushed off on them. You actually have to be really careful and think hard about what it is you need them to do and what they're doing. So what we had to do is provide supervision of the contractor as they were doing the work. And the first thing we had to do to engage them at all was to pull together an initial inventory of all of our assets. And that might seem simple, except in SNOLAB's case, it's really challenging. Because one thing is that the equipment and the facility ownership at SNOLAB are really complex. Most of the experiments themselves are owned by multiple universities, sometimes multiple funding agencies, and these universities and agencies are in different countries. So not just different provinces, but different countries as well. And it becomes even more tricky because some assets started out, say, as a university asset, and then that asset's ownership was transferred to SNOLAB. And so it took a bit. And we also have a lot of equipment. And like I said, we hadn't really been tracking the ownership super well in that first decade. So what we started to do is that we actually have a computerized maintenance management system that we use for putting in work orders when things break. And so when something breaks, it goes into the system, and then we have a record that it exists. So we started by pulling all the inventory from this computerized system from the work orders to make a list of what we had. And then we went through the list, and essentially I want to say our project management team went through this list, and they identified what is capital and what isn't to start it. Then after they had that list together, the next thing they had to do is go out to managers and asset owners around the entire laboratory and talk to them and say, here's the list. Does this make sense? What's missing? And add more to the list. And so ultimately in the end, we ended up then with our list of assets. Oh, and I guess actually if I can go back, go back one slide. I wanted to point out this picture that you see here. This is actually our cute test facility that's underground sitting in the ladder lab. This is an example of a piece of a facility that originally was owned by a university. It was a shirk chair who used his money to build this facility for a specific purpose. And after he was done with that purpose, it still is very useful to SNOLAB. It's actually where we run our quantum science program now. And so he transferred that ownership then to SNOLAB from that. So that's one example of the type of equipment I'm talking about. And this itself, if I tear it apart, has multiple components to it that would be individual assets. All right, so now we have our list. What do you do? So the next step for us was to look at all the assets and make sure that to make sure we had the owners and what category listed. So the project manager identified an owner and for each of the assets and then grouped them into the three categories that we were asked for. We then brought the consultant company to site, and this was actually done in multiple visits. I make it sound like it was one and it was easy, but they came multiple times to site, and we literally walked them around the building. We walked them around the underground lab, and we showed them every single asset, and they entered it into their computer system to do things. So at that time, then Roth used their software to estimate the repair and replacement parts or costs, the replacement years for our non-scientific equipment. But what they couldn't do for us is provide that information for our scientific equipment. So that's something that we then had to do on our own using our best judgment. So then, we have the full list. We have everything CFI asked for. We could package it up and send it off to them with our 15-year plan. But what is it that we do with it at this time? So we have an asset table that has a lot of information in it, but we don't still have an asset plan. So the next thing that we decided to do is to develop a strategy to use this information to better inform the management of the lab. So, basically, entering the data into the CFI prescribed format, we did a lot of verification of estimates. So the raw data came to us. And this is basically data that you're going to get of what they think your lifespan should be or how things operate in a normal environment. Much of our equipment is being operated 2 kilometers underground where the pressure is very different. In some cases, the equipment's actually in a very dirty mining environment. And so lifespans in that equipment, it could all be different. So we spent a lot of time sort of scrubbing the data and saying, do we really believe that this is the way it is working based on the data we had? And so what we did then after we had that all settled is we basically took the table and we turned it over to our operations manager and we said, hey, Mike, pick your top 25 assets that you think need attention in the upcoming fiscal year, and then put in a proposal to us of what it's going to cost to fix them so we in upper management can decide where we should invest our resources. And so things that we had to consider when this was going on is the asset history. Are the systems that you're looking at actually receiving maintenance sooner than the algorithm was predicting from Roth? Is it a critical system? Is it a system that supports health and safety in some way? And so I just want to pull out a couple of items from this asset management list that we have of projects and point out areas where we decided to address things, like kind of illustrating how it is, we used our own judgment to decide what to prioritize. So I tried to pick 2 items that probably all labs have to deal with in some way. One, a UPS. So your power supply backup for when something goes wrong. Everybody has this. We have lots of UPS systems across the lab. In this case here, I think I'm showing about 5 different UPSs, all of which, according to the plan, still have quite a bit of life left in them, a couple of years and stuff. So maybe you wouldn't flag that right away. However, there's a UPS in the cube hall. It's the 3rd one down on this list. We flagged that for early replacement. And the reason we did is that it supports a critical life support system underground. In that hall, if for some reason, although it's very unlikely to ever happen, we would have a rupture in one of the experiments. It contains a large amount of argon, and the amount of argon that is gas that's stored in this vessel is enough that if there was a major leak, it could actually create an oxygen deficiency hazard in that hall. So for sure, we want to make sure that the UPS on the system that's monitoring the oxygen level in that hall is working. If the power goes out and we have people working there and they're getting out, we still want to know if there's a deficiency. So we flagged that one for early replacement. So just an example of how we went about it. The second thing is an HVAC unit. So perhaps if you're embedded in a university, you're not actually responsible for your HVAC and you can just call up somebody. But for us, we're responsible for that. So we have 3 different air handling units that are on the surface in our surface facility to help with the HVAC. All of them seem to have some life left in it, according to the computer program. However, when we really looked through this and we were scrubbing it, we decided to flag AC Unit 3. And the reason we did this is because when we look at its maintenance history, we see that it's getting maintenance faster than the other two units, and maybe a little bit sooner than it really should. So it seems to us that this might be a system that would fail sooner. And it also, the air conditioning obviously is also supporting critical systems inside the surface building labs. So this seemed like a good reason that you might want to flag it. So as you can imagine, like, we have thousands of assets. And so it's going through all of them in sort of this way, thinking about what is making most sense. So we essentially went, so basically we started with a table. We have a strategy for how we're using the information in that table. But what we don't really have yet is what you might consider an asset management plan. So if you were to talk to a project manager, they have a very distinct idea of what they think an asset management plan is. And that is that you would have this all loaded into some kind of computer system that would flag for you and push out for you when it's time to replace stuff. It might even order parts for you. It would do a variety of things. So I would say at SNOLAB right now, we have a strategy, but we don't have a full plan um, that we have implemented. So, but we have a plan for how we're going to get to a plan. And so our next step is to our actual CMMS system is called Fix, actually can do a lot of these functions for us. So all we need to do now is populate the CMS system with the asset uh, table data. And then we have to enable the system to generate alerts for scheduling, maintenance, or replacing different parts. And then what we have to do after we do that is that as we're acquiring new assets, which we're doing all the time, is that we need to track them and we need to make sure that they get into our system. I know that this sounds very trivial, but for those of you who've ever had to do this kind of work, it actually is an immense amount of time to get all of these systems up and going, to make sure that they're running and operating the way they are. It's not as easy as just doing data entry. There is some work to be done on the back end. So at this point, I'll just make my conclusion. So I would say we're evolving to a data-driven asset strategy. We started small. SNOLAB started small with a limited team managing complex experiments. We experienced a period of rapid growth from 2002 to 2012, so over a decade, where our staff basically grew by over a factor of 10. And as the lab filled and as our staff evolved, the complexity of the equipment that we were managing and our infrastructure grew. Our early approach in asset management was very reactive. If it breaks, fix it. If it's a critical system, buy a spare. That's not really a strategy that will work for a lab as mature, complex, and international in nature who wants to keep its reputation alive. And so we realized that we needed to evolve from this reactive to a more proactive way of managing our assets. And so where we're at right now is we're transitioning to a strategy. We built a comprehensive asset inventory. We validated the data and we prioritized our top assets for maintenance and replacement. And then our next step is to actually implement a CMMS driven plan to monitor and maintain our critical equipment proactively. I would say SNOLAB now has a structured, data-driven approach to managing its assets that's supported both by that supports both our scientific excellence and operational resilience. Thank you.
Yes. So I had a question about the prioritization. I understand that you asked Mike. Seems very useful to get the input of people within SNOLAB. But then, how do you go on for prioritization long term? Because it seems like it was really focused on this fiscal year. Or
Yeah, and no, and that is like because that's where we are now. So I guess there is sort of a step that I kind of missed in there. So we started actually by just focusing on one division, and the operations group within that division, because that's where a lot of our real critical systems happen to reside. And so, in order to get from the point where we're looking 1 year to looking multiple years down the road, what our plan is, and so this is work that we haven't done yet. I've only gone to what the work we've done. Our plan is to really now divide up these assets into the different divisions and into the different managers within those divisions, making them responsible and accountable for looking at their assets, evaluating, like really scrubbing it like we did for operations and making priorities. And so probably like the next step will be looking at that and basically providing that prioritized list with multiple people who are responsible for different parts of the plan. Like you can't just give, 1,000 assets to one person and say prioritize the list. It's breaking it up and prioritizing it, coming back together, meeting with groups as we sort through what the prioritization should be and how to use that. Our next step actually for prioritization is that we're looking at, by having this list of what these systems are, where they are, and when opportunities come to potentially get additional funding to support some of this, we have to put in a proposal to the province every 2 years, right? And so if we can come up with things that we need and we have that list in our back pocket, it's really easy to write a proposal, say, we need to do this and we need to do it sooner. So the next step really is dividing the assets up even in a more fine way and spreading it out across the lab, having each of those managers do the same prioritization that we asked the operations group to do, coming back together, looking at that plan as a whole and how things fit together, and then translating that information into a computerized system that can help us do predictive things. And that, I think, also is another step that's going to take some significant effort. Like I think we can do a lot even with a table, but I think if we can have something that helps us, sends us reminders, it can be really helpful.
yeah, and it's hard to prioritize some things now and think about 15 years from now. And yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to deal with things that are breaking now, right? But if you're always working in, when it's broke, fix it, and just being reactive, you're subject to failure. So you have to work on things that are lower in priority, perhaps, or that are past their due or coming due, and support critical things. And so for us, it was just developing a structure of trying to figure out how to identify it and having enough people looking at it, and then people working together to make those trade-offs of where we should do the investment. And so it requires your senior level people. It requires your middle managers. And sometimes the middle management actually has to talk to the people on the ground to know what's going on as well.
thank you. Yeah.
So thank you for walking through that process. It's so helpful to hear the tangible way someone went through this. If you could flash back in time to the moment that you opened that email, with knowing what you know now, would you have done it the same way? Like, I'm curious, would you still have used the engineering firm? Because it sounds like in the end, you and so I'm curious, would you use the engineering firm? And if so, what was the major benefit you got from using it? And if you would have done anything different?
So absolutely. I would not have changed anything we did about working that way. Even the team members who were involved in it, I wouldn't even change them. They worked together really well. Having one project manager who was helping to interface with the engineering firm. So let me go back. Like the reason I really stressed the engineering firm and kind of painted like the constraints that you have, like they're not going to be able to do everything for you. But the truth is like we didn't have the expertise in-house to be able to look at all systems across the entire lab and come up with some of these things, like how many years of life are left, what is its condition. Like doing that, like having a computer, there's just computer software out there that can tell you. You just put in, well, here's a unit of I don't know, it's an HVAC, it's a UPS, and it just has, based on lots of data from all over the place, It just has these sort of averages and what it is that you can expect. That's something that we can't do in-house. The fact that they couldn't do it for all of our scientific equipment, that's okay. We actually know some of our scientific equipment pretty well and can work through that. But many of our assets are not actually specialized pieces of scientific equipment. They're assets that everybody has, that every organization has. Those were the assets we needed the computer or the engineering firm to help us with. So I think that our approach was good, and I don't think I would change it. If I could start it earlier, I would have done that, but I don't think we could have even really started earlier. There was so much we had to put in place in order to get it done. And the truth is we got it done on time. I dare to say we actually turned the report in early, but but I feel like that's just bragging. Yes.
Can you talk about your enterprise risk strategy? So how are you mitigating vendor dependencies? Like we have seen for some of our major equipment delays, like weeks, months, even up to a year. So how are you planning for that? Assuming for some of your equipment, you don't have many vendors, given that we have now terrorists and all these difficult times. How are you planning for all of that?
Yeah, that is a great point. And so let me kind of backtrack a little bit to say a couple things because we didn't one of the things that we did when we were working on the 15-year plan, because we were putting a lot of effort into the asset management and different systems, we started wondering if the lab should invest in an enterprise solution that we roll out across the whole organization. Um, we actually talked to some of the other MRFs who actually were using asset management systems. We actually even talked to them last year at this workshop. I'm looking at you, Tim, to say, what are you guys using? Do you like it? What don't you like? Do you think because we were starting, we weren't committed to anything. And SNOLAB's a little bit unique from some of the other MRFs. We're not embedded. And by embedded, I mean, we are not embedded in a single university. We have a university lead, but we're operated by a consortium through a trust agreement of universities. And we're like a 6-hour drive away from the lead institution. So we are, we're out on our own. We have our own systems. We have our own HR. Like we're a fairly complex infrastructure. And so unlike some of the other MRFs where you may be beholden to using the software that your university uses, that's not our case. We have to go out and buy our own licenses and such. So it was wide open. So we did actually look at a number of platforms and we considered potentially moving to an enterprise solution. We decided that was going to cost us a lot of time and energy this year. And like if we were doing it now and we just weren't ready. And so we decided to table that. So we had been using another system called Fix and exploring those capabilities. It is a system that came into place before I arrived. That decision to go with that software was made. And I don't know the details of why it was that system versus other systems. But as we explored different enterprise solutions, including looking at the systems we had now, we realized that we can actually use Fix to do quite a bit of the management. We haven't quite crossed the road yet of looking at what we're going to do with tariffs, what we're going to do with delays in supplies chains. I don't know how we can be proactive on that other than just as we get wind of things, we, like everybody else in this room, are watching what's going on internationally and trying to use our best judgment as to when it is that we move forward. We've also been affected because Ontario, I'm looking at Sandra, I don't remember, like sometime within the last year, maybe it was 2, decided that there was like a Buy Ontario Act, which makes it even more complicated to source things for the lab. And so that's probably where our partnership with Queen's University, who has all their procurement and stuff, helps us to guide what we can and can't do and how to make exceptions. And it has slowed down the procurement. That is a fact I can't get around.